Your Honor, this case represents everything wrong with a system that can be manipulated by those who would exploit our natural desire to protect vulnerable seniors. Dr. Eleanor Wright is not vulnerable, she is the victim of a calculated scheme by her son to gain control of her substantial assets during a personal financial crisis. The evidence shows not a woman in cognitive decline, but a son willing to manufacture evidence and manipulate the legal system for financial gain. Judge Rodriguez took 30 minutes to deliberate before returning to the courtroom. The silence was absolute as she delivered her ruling. After reviewing all evidence and testimony presented, this court finds no credible evidence of cognitive impairment or incompetence on the part of Dr. Eleanor Wright. The petition for guardianship is denied in its entirety. Eleanor maintained her composure, though her heart soared with relief. But Judge Rodriguez wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court is deeply troubled by evidence suggesting that this petition was based on false information provided to law enforcement and potentially fraudulent testimony. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of possible perjury and elder abuse charges. Andrew's face went ashen as the implications sank in. Not only had he lost his bid for guardianship, but he now faced potential criminal charges. Additionally, Judge Rodriguez continued, I am issuing a restraining order prohibiting Andrew Wright from having any contact with Dr. Wright for a period of 90 days pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. As court adjourned, Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions, triumph at her vindication, profound sadness at the destruction of her relationship with her son, and deep gratitude toward those who had fought for her. Rebecca embraced her mother fiercely outside the courtroom. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have realized what Andrew was planning sooner. You came when it mattered most, Eleanor assured her, holding her daughter close. Victoria hurried past. Then without making eye contact, following Andrew and Blackwell down the corridor in urgent conversation. Outside the courthouse, in the crisp October sunlight, Samantha, Alicia, and Eleanor stood together on the broad stone steps, the weight of the legal battle lifting from their shoulders. It's over, Alicia said with evident satisfaction. Andrew will likely face serious consequences, and there's no chance of any future guardianship petitions being taken seriously. Samantha turned to Eleanor with a smile that mixed professional triumph with personal joy. You're free, Eleanor. Completely free. As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Eleanor realized that Andrew's scheme had failed in every possible way. Not only had he not gained control of her assets, but he'd destroyed his own reputation and possibly his freedom in the process. Yet as Rebecca linked arms with her mother, as Samantha walked beside them discussing dinner plans to celebrate their victory, Eleanor understood that endings could also be beginnings. At 68, she was starting a new chapter, one where chosen family might prove stronger than blood ties, where new friendships might blossom into something deeper, and where the future stretched before her, hers to shape as she wished. Andrew had tried to write her ending. Instead, he had inadvertently given her a new beginning. The quiet corner table at Café Milano felt like a sanctuary after the harsh fluorescent lights and adversarial atmosphere of the courtroom. Eleanor sat across from Samantha in the elegant Italian restaurant, the afternoon sunlight filtering through tall windows and casting a warm glow across their faces. Rebecca had departed for her hotel to catch up on sleep after her red-eye flight, promising to join them for a proper celebration dinner later. I still can't quite believe it's truly over, Eleanor said, her fingers wrapped around a glass of Pinot Noir, the first she'd allowed herself since Andrew's initial ambush at her penthouse. The adrenaline from the courtroom victory was finally ebbing, leaving her feeling both exhausted and oddly weightless. Samantha reached across the small table and briefly touched Eleanor's hand, the gesture supportive without being presumptuous. You were magnificent today. The way you maintained your composure while Andrew performed his concerned son act, how you answered Blackwell's questions without a hint of the anger you had every right to feel, it was remarkable. Eleanor felt a flutter of something she'd almost forgotten, the pleasure of being seen and appreciated by someone whose opinion mattered. I had excellent representation and excellent preparation. Their eyes met across the table, and Eleanor saw in Samantha's expression the same mixture of relief and unspoken possibility that she herself was feeling. The legal battle that had brought them together was over, but something else was just beginning to take shape between them. Eleanor, Samantha said, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that made her seem younger than her 43 years, I know this is complicated. I know there are ethical considerations about relationships that evolve from professional circumstances. But I also know that I haven't felt this kind of connection with anyone since long before Cynthia left. Eleanor studied Samantha's face, taking in the intelligence in her eyes, the subtle lines that spoke of both laughter and concern, the quiet confidence that had made her such a formidable advocate. At 68, Eleanor had thought herself past the age of new beginnings, but these Past weeks had taught her otherwise. It is complicated, she agreed, her medical training making her naturally cautious. But I learned something vital during this ordeal. I'm still capable of growth, of change, of taking risks. And Samantha, whatever this is between us, it feels worth exploring. Samantha's smile transformed her face, erasing the lingering tension from the courtroom battle. I was hoping you'd say that. They talked for nearly 2 hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly from the legal victory to more personal territories, books they'd loved, places they'd traveled, challenges they'd overcome. When Samantha mentioned her passion for classical music and hiking in the Adirondacks, Eleanor found herself imagining shared concerts, quiet evenings discussing Bach and Chopin, weekend escapes to mountain trails. There's something we need to discuss, Eleanor said as their dessert arrived, a shared tiramisu that neither had the appetite for but ordered anyway as an excuse to extend their time together. Rebecca wants me to visit Seattle for Thanksgiving, to spend time with her and the grandchildren. That sounds wonderful, Samantha replied, her expression warm. Family healing is important after everything that's happened. It is, Eleanor agreed. And yet, I find myself reluctant to leave New York right now, when this, whatever this is, feels so new and fragile. Samantha considered this thoughtfully. Seattle isn't Mars. And I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor. We have time to discover what this connection might become. The simple assurance, we have time, felt profound after weeks of fighting for Eleanor's very autonomy. Time was precisely what Andrew had tried to steal from her, the freedom to determine her own future at her own pace. As they left the restaurant, walking together through the crisp autumn afternoon, Samantha's hand found Eleanor's. The simple gesture sent a current of warmth through Eleanor's entire body, not just physical warmth but the emotional comfort of connection, of not facing the future alone. Would you like to come up to my penthouse? Eleanor asked as they approached her building. I promise there are no wandering seniors in the hallways, and all my kettles are carefully monitored. Samantha laughed, the sound carefree in a way Eleanor hadn't heard before. I'd love to see your home, the real version, not Nathan Blackwell's distorted interpretation. Eleanor's penthouse felt different as she unlocked the door and led Samantha inside. The elegant rooms that had been photographed and misrepresented as evidence of decline now seemed to glow with renewed purpose. Samantha moved slowly through the living room, examining the bookshelves, the medical awards displayed with quiet pride, the art collection that reflected decades of thoughtful acquisition. This is beautiful, she said, pausing before a small Diebenkorn canvas that Eleanor and Thomas had purchased to celebrate her appointment as Chief of Surgery. It feels like you, intellectually rigorous, aesthetically sophisticated, deeply thoughtful. Thomas helped choose most of the art, Eleanor said, then caught herself, suddenly self-conscious about mentioning her late husband while entertaining a woman she was increasingly drawn to. But Samantha's expression showed only understanding. He had excellent taste, in art and in women. They settled on the terrace overlooking Central Park, the autumn colors creating a tapestry of russet and gold below them. The space where Andrew had once sat spinning his web of false concern now felt reclaimed, transformed back into a place of authenticity rather than manipulation. Eleanor, Samantha said, turning in her chair to face her more directly, I need you to know that my feelings for you aren't born from the intensity of the legal battle. It's not adrenaline or proximity or some kind of white knight complex. What is it then? Eleanor asked, genuinely curious about how this accomplished younger woman saw her. It's the way your mind works, how you approach this crisis. With both analytical precision and emotional courage. It's the grace you showed under unimaginable pressure. The way you make me want to be more thoughtful, more deliberate in my own life. Alicia moved to her laptop and pulled up a series of case files. Blackwell has filed 16 emergency guardianship petitions in the past 2 years. 14 were successful. The pattern is always the same: sudden family concerns, staged incidents, emergency filings that leave the elderly person no time to prepare an adequate defense. What happened to those people? Eleanor asked quietly. Most ended up in assisted living facilities, their assets liquidated to pay for care. Alicia replied, her voice carrying the indignation of someone who'd chosen elder law to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. The family members who filed the petitions typically became financial guardians with significant control over how the money was spent. Samantha leaned forward, her expression serious. Eleanor, I need you to understand what we're up against. Blackwell is very good at what he does, and the system is biased toward protection even when that protection isn't needed. Judges would rather err on the side of caution than risk a vulnerable senior being harmed. So what do? We fight back, Samantha said simply. But it's going to be intense, and it's going to be public. Once we're in court, everything about your life becomes evidence, your financial decisions, your daily routine, your relationships. Your past. All of it becomes fair game. Alicia had moved to another section of the whiteboard where she'd outlined their defense strategy. We're going to demonstrate that you're not just competent but exceptionally so. We need character witnesses. People who can testify to your mental acuity and independent functioning. Dr. Sarah Goldstein has already agreed to testify, Samantha added. I spoke with her this morning. She's outraged about Andrew's actions. Eleanor nodded, feeling a spark of hope at the thought of her colleagues rallying to her defense. Richard. Chen would certainly testify as well. And most of my former surgical team. Perfect. The more professional witnesses we have, the better, Samantha made notes on her legal pad. We're also going to need you to undergo a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation with an independent expert, another doctor, a specialist in cognitive assessment who has no relationship with you or your family. Someone whose opinion can't be questioned as biased. Alicia had pulled up another document on her laptop. There's something else we need to discuss. Blackwell has filed a motion to have you undergo immediate psychiatric evaluation based on what he calls agitation and resistance to family assistance, displayed during last night's incident. Eleanor felt her anger flare. My resistance to being manipulated and lied about as evidence of mental illness? In Blackwell's hands, it could be, Samantha said grimly. He's very skilled at reframing normal emotional responses as symptoms of cognitive decline. Your anger at being falsely accused becomes paranoia. Your insistence on independence becomes poor judgment. Your refusal to accept Andrew's version of events becomes denial and confusion. The scope of the manipulation was breathtaking. Andrew and Blackwell had created a trap where any normal human response to being attacked could be twisted into evidence of incompetence. How do we counter that? By being smarter than they are, Alicia said with fierce determination. We document everything, every interaction, every conversation, every decision you make. We create a record that shows not just competence but superior functioning. Samantha stood and moved to the window overlooking the Manhattan streets below. Eleanor, there's something else we need to discuss. The relationship between attorney and client in a case like this can become very intense. We'll be working closely together, often under stressful circumstances. If at any point you feel uncomfortable with the level of involvement required, or if you want to bring in additional counsel, I trust you, Eleanor interrupted. Both of you. You're fighting for something I never thought I'd have to defend. My right to live my own life. Samantha turned back to her, and Eleanor caught something in her expression that went beyond professional concern. We won't let them take that away from you. Alicia cleared her throat diplomatically. I hate to interrupt, but we need to talk about the media strategy. Media strategy? These cases sometimes attract public attention, especially when they involve allegations of elder abuse, Alicia explained. If we decide to go public with the real story, that this is a financially motivated attack rather than genuine concern for your welfare, it could help generate support for your case. Samantha frowned slightly. That's a double-edged sword. Media attention could also make you a target for more scrutiny. Or it could expose the pattern of Blackwell's practice and Andrew's financial motives, Alicia countered. Sometimes sunshine is the best disinfectant. Eleanor considered this carefully. The physician in her recoiled from the idea of her private life becoming public spectacle, but the pragmatist recognized that public opinion could influence legal outcomes. Let's keep that option in reserve, she decided. I'd rather win this case on the merits than in the court of public opinion. A knock on the conference room door interrupted their strategy session. Samantha's assistant appeared with a concerned expression. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a reporter from the New York Times on the phone. She's asking about the Wright guardianship case and wants to know if you have any comment on allegations that Dr. Wright has been neglecting her health and safety. The three women exchanged grim looks. Blackwell was already playing the media game. Tell her we have no comment. At this time, Samantha instructed. And start a log of all media contacts. We need to track how this story is being shaped. After the assistant left, Samantha turned back to Eleanor with an expression that mixed professional determination with personal concern. This is what we were afraid of. Blackwell is getting ahead of the narrative, painting you as a vulnerable elder in denial about her condition. Then we need to be smarter and faster, Eleanor said, drawing on the strength that had carried her through decades of groundbreaking surgeries and hospital politics. What do we do first? Alicia consulted her timeline on the whiteboard. First, we interview all potential witnesses and prepare their testimony. Second, we schedule your neuropsychological evaluation with our expert. Third, we file our response to the petition, including all the evidence we've gathered about Andrew's financial situation and Blackwell's pattern of abuse. And fourth, we prepare to expose exactly what this case is really about, Samantha finished, her voice carrying a note of steel. Andrew Wright is about to learn that attempting to destroy an innocent person's life to solve your financial problems has consequences. Eleanor felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of intellectual combat, the satisfaction of having worthy allies, the confidence that came from being brilliantly represented. Andrew had chosen the wrong target. And underestimated the wrong woman. "When do we start?" she asked, her surgeon's focus fully engaged. Samantha smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Eleanor felt genuinely hopeful. "We already have." The sushi containers sat forgotten on Samantha's conference table as the clock on her office wall ticked past midnight. What had begun as a working dinner to prepare for tomorrow's hearing had evolved into something neither Eleanor nor Samantha had anticipated, a conversation that transcended the boundaries of attorney and client. "I never imagined at 68 I'd be sitting in a law office fighting my own son for the right to control my life," Eleanor said, absently stirring wasabi into her soy sauce with a bamboo chopstick. The day's intense preparation had left her reflective, her usual clinical detachment softened by exhaustion and the peculiar intimacy that develops between people under siege. Samantha looked up from the expert witness statements she'd been reviewing, noting the rare vulnerability in Eleanor's voice. "I never imagined at 43 I'd be starting over after my partner of 12 years decided she'd rather be with her yoga instructor. Life specializes in unexpected plot twists." The admission hung between them in the quiet office. Outside, Manhattan's lights created a glittering backdrop, but inside, the professional distance they'd maintained began to dissolve under the weight of shared purpose and mutual respect. "How long ago?" Eleanor asked, recognizing the particular quality of recent heartbreak in Samantha's voice. 8 months. Samantha set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, the late hour and emotional intensity of their case cracking her professional veneer. 12 years together, a home we renovated ourselves, a future we'd planned, and then Cynthia decided that wasn't enough. She left a note on the kitchen counter while I was in court defending an elderly client against his predatory nephew. The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. "You were protecting someone else's family while your own was falling apart. That's a poetic way of looking at it," Samantha offered a tired smile. "Though I'm not sure if family is the right word for what Cynthia and I had. Families don't usually evaporate with a 3-paragraph note and an empty closet." Eleanor nodded, understanding the particular ache of betrayal. "Thomas and I were fortunate. 40 years of marriage that ended only with his death. But I've watched enough colleagues go through what you describe, the shock of having the future you imagined suddenly erased." There was no sign of Rebecca yet, though her flight should have landed hours ago. Judge Camila Rodriguez entered precisely at 3 p.m., her salt and pepper hair pulled back severely, her demeanor suggesting a no-nonsense approach to family drama. Her reputation for fairness was well established, but so was her inclination to protect vulnerable seniors when any question of safety arose. "The court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "The matter before us is an emergency petition for guardianship in the case of Wright versus Wright." Blackwell rose with practiced confidence, his opening statement a masterpiece of manipulative framing. "Your Honor, this is one of the most difficult situations a family can face. Andrew Wright loves his mother deeply, but he can no longer stand by and watch Dr. Eleanor Wright endanger herself through impaired judgment and cognitive decline." He presented the evidence methodically, the police report from the welfare check, photographs of what he claimed showed unsafe conditions in Eleanor's penthouse, testimony about Andrew finding her confused in the hallway, and what he characterized as a pattern of resistance to family assistance. The respondent's anger at her son's intervention, her refusal to acknowledge obvious safety concerns, and her denial of documented incidents are all consistent with the early stages of dementia. Mr. Wright seeks temporary guardianship not out of convenience but out of genuine fear for his mother's welfare. When Blackwell called Andrew to testify, his performance was masterful, voice breaking at precisely the right moments as he described his mother's alleged confusion, his own anguish at watching a brilliant woman decline, his desperate fear that something terrible would happen if she remained alone. "I found her in the hallway at midnight, Your Honor," Andrew testified, his eyes downcast as if the memory pained him. "She was in her robe, disoriented, asking for my father who's been gone for 5 years. When I tried to help her back to her apartment, she became agitated, accused me of interfering. It broke my heart to see her that way, this woman who was always so sharp, so capable, now unable to recognize her own confusion." Blackwell guided him through each alleged incident with strategic precision. The supposedly scorched kettle became evidence of dangerous forgetfulness. The supposedly misplaced bills became proof of cognitive decline. Even Eleanor's medical colleagues' regular meetings were reframed as concerning isolation from family. Has your mother shown resistance to family assistance? Blackwell asked, setting up the crucial narrative of denial. Yes, Andrew replied. His expression a study in filial concern. She becomes angry when we try to help, accuses us of lying about things she doesn't remember. It's like she's becoming paranoid, suspicious of the people who love her most. Throughout this testimony, Eleanor maintained perfect composure, her surgeon's ability to remain calm during crisis serving her well. She noticed Judge Rodriguez watching her reactions carefully, assessing not just Andrew's words but Eleanor's responses to them. When Samantha began her cross-examination, her approach was surgical in its precision. Mr. Wright, you testified that you found your mother confused in the hallway at midnight. What were you doing at her building at that hour? I couldn't sleep. I was worried about her, so I went to check. You have a key to her apartment? Yes, for emergencies. When did she give you this key? Andrew hesitated just long enough for Judge Rodriguez to notice. During her hip replacement recovery last year. Samantha moved to her evidence table and retrieved a document. This is a statement from the building superintendent indicating that Dr. Wright specifically requested no duplicate keys be made for any reason. How do you explain that? Objection. Blackwell interjected. The superintendent isn't here to testify about this document. He will be this afternoon, Samantha countered smoothly. The witness can answer the question. Judge Rodriguez nodded. Overruled. The witness will answer. Andrew's composure began to crack under Samantha's relentless questioning about the key, the timing of his visit, the convenient presence of his phone to document the alleged incident. Mr. Wright, are you currently facing significant investment losses in your firm? Samantha pivoted suddenly. That's not relevant to my mother's condition, Andrew replied, color rising in his face. Please answer the question. Yes, but. And would gaining control of your mother's substantial assets help resolve your financial difficulties? How dare you suggest I would exploit my own mother for money? Andrew's outrage seemed genuine, but the damage was done. Samantha had planted the seed of financial motivation, and Judge Rodriguez's expression suggested she was considering that possibility seriously. The courtroom doors opened quietly, and Eleanor felt a surge of relief as Rebecca slipped into the back row. Her daughter looked exhausted from her cross-country flight but determined, nodding slightly to signal her readiness to testify. When Dr. Julia Feldman took the stand, her testimony proved devastating to Andrew's case. She described her examination of Eleanor during the police incident, her findings of complete cognitive competence, and her professional opinion that the claimed confusion was inconsistent with her observations. In your medical opinion, doctor, did Dr. Wright show any signs of dementia or cognitive impairment during your examination? Samantha asked. None whatsoever, Dr. Feldman stated firmly. Her memory was excellent, her reasoning was clear, and her emotional responses were entirely appropriate to the situation. If anything, she demonstrated superior cognitive function for her age. Blackwell's cross-examination attempted to suggest that a single examination couldn't rule out cognitive decline, but Dr. Feldman held firm. I've been Dr. Wright's physician for over a decade. I've seen no evidence of cognitive deterioration during that entire period. Dr. Sarah Goldstein's testimony provided a professional colleague's perspective that painted Eleanor as sharp, engaged, and fully competent. I've observed Dr. Wright in complex medical discussions for the past 2 years. Her analytical abilities, her memory for intricate surgical techniques, her capacity for nuanced scientific thinking, all are exceptional. Any suggestion of cognitive impairment is simply not supported by observable evidence. The neuropsychological evaluation Samantha had arranged provided scientific backup to the witness testimony. Dr. Mark Levin, an independent expert, had subjected Eleanor to hours of cognitive testing the previous day. Dr. Wright's test results place her in the superior range for cognitive functioning across all measured domains, Dr. Levin testified. Her memory, executive function, language skills, and problem-solving abilities are all well above average for her age group. I found no evidence of any cognitive impairment whatsoever. But the most dramatic moment came when Samantha called Rebecca Wright to the stand. Andrew's head snapped up in shock as his sister entered the courtroom. Victoria grabbed his arm in alarm, whispering urgently in his ear. Ms. Wright, Samantha began gently, you are the respondent's daughter and the petitioner's sister. When did you first learn about this guardianship petition? Rebecca's voice was clear and steady. 2 days ago, when my brother called asking me to sign an affidavit claiming our mother was showing signs of mental decline. And what was your response? I refused. I speak with my mother via video call every Sunday. She's as sharp and articulate as she's always been. When I told Andrew this, he became angry and suggested I wasn't paying close enough attention. Did your brother mention anything about his financial situation during this conversation? Rebecca's testimony was devastating. He said his investment firm was in trouble. He mentioned needing temporary liquidity and that family resources should help family in need. When I asked directly if this guardianship was about gaining control of mom's assets, he didn't deny it. He said he was protecting the family resources. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Blackwell jumped to his feet, objecting vehemently while Andrew whispered frantically in his ear. Judge Rodriguez's gavel restored order. Ms. Wright, Samantha continued when quiet returned, in your observation, has your mother shown any signs of cognitive impairment or confusion that would warrant the extreme step of removing her independence? Rebecca looked directly at her brother, her expression a mixture of sadness and determination. Absolutely not. My mother is the same brilliant, articulate woman she's always been. The only thing that's changed is my brother's financial situation. Blackwell's attempt at damage control during cross-examination only highlighted the inconsistencies in Andrew's claims. His questions suggesting Rebecca was out of touch with her mother's daily life backfired when she detailed their regular video calls, shared virtual movie nights, and ongoing discussions about medical research that demonstrated Eleanor's continued intellectual engagement. The superintendent of Eleanor's building testified next, confirming that Andrew had obtained a key without authorization by claiming an emergency. The building's security footage, which Samantha had subpoenaed, showed no evidence of Eleanor wandering hallways on the night in question, only Andrew arriving at 11:45 p.m. and using a key to enter the building. By the time Samantha delivered her closing argument, the momentum had shifted dramatically. What was he like? Samantha asked, her question personal in a way that acknowledged the boundaries between them had shifted. Eleanor smiled, memory softening her expression. Brilliant. Kind. Stubborn. He was a neurosurgeon. We met during a complicated tumor resection that required both our specialties. He couldn't understand why the heart and brain were treated as separate systems when they were so fundamentally interconnected. That became a metaphor for our marriage, I suppose. How so? Different specialties, different approaches, but part of an integrated system. We disagreed about almost everything, politics, music, whether the windows should be open at night, but those disagreements made us both better thinkers. He was my intellectual sparring partner for 40 years. Samantha smiled at the evident affection in Eleanor's voice. You must miss him terribly. Every day, Eleanor acknowledged. But what I find most painful now is imagining what he would think about Andrew's behavior. Thomas was so proud of our children. He believed we'd raise them with integrity and compassion. This would break his heart. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of familial disappointment settling between them. Both women had experienced profound loss, Eleanor through death, Samantha through betrayal, yet both had continued forward, rebuilding their lives with quiet determination. Can I ask you something? Eleanor said, her academic curiosity overriding her usual reserve. Why elder law? With your skills, you could be making 3 times the money in corporate practice or facing less heartbreak in almost any other specialty. Samantha considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. My grandmother, Esther Reynolds. She was extraordinary, a Holocaust survivor who came to America with nothing, built a successful business, raised 3 children on her own after my grandfather died. She was the most capable, resilient person I've ever known. Samantha stood and moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the nighttime cityscape. When she was 83, her youngest son, my Uncle David, convinced a court she was becoming difficult and unsafe. He had her declared incompetent based on testimony from a doctor who'd evaluated her for 15 minutes without an interpreter, even though English was her 3rd language. Eleanor felt a chill of recognition at the parallels to her own situation. She spent her final years in a nursing facility watching strangers control every aspect of her existence, Samantha continued, her voice tight with old anger. Meanwhile, Uncle David sold her business, her home in Brooklyn, the jewelry she'd brought from Europe, everything she'd spent a lifetime building. She died before I finished law school, before I could help her. But not before she made me. Promise I'd never let it happen to anyone else if I could prevent it. Samantha turned back to face Eleanor, her professional mask completely gone now. Every case I take, every client I represent, I'm keeping that promise to my grandmother. I couldn't save her, but I can fight for you and others like you. Eleanor was momentarily speechless, moved by the personal mission behind Samantha's professional dedication. I'm sorry you lost her that way. I'm sorry Andrew is putting you through this, Samantha replied, her voice carrying an edge that suggested her feelings about the case had moved beyond professional concern. Before Eleanor could respond, her phone chimed with a text message. The name on the screen made her breath catch. "It's Rebecca," she said, showing Samantha the screen. "My daughter wants to video call right now." Samantha frowned. That could be a trap. If Andrew has gotten to her, she might be trying to get you to say something they could use against you. Eleanor read the message again. "Mom, need to speak with you urgently about Andrew. Please video call when you can. This isn't right." "Or she might be trying to warn me," Eleanor said quietly. Rebecca was always the one with the stronger moral compass. Even as a child, she couldn't tolerate unfairness. "It's your decision," Samantha said, though her tone suggested caution. "But if you speak with her, remember that anything you say could potentially be used in court tomorrow." 10 minutes later, Eleanor sat in Samantha's private office, the attorney discreetly out of camera range but present to monitor the conversation. When Rebecca's face appeared on the screen, Eleanor was struck by how tired her daughter looked, her usual vibrant energy dimmed by evident worry. "Mom," Rebecca began, her voice breaking slightly. "I just got off the phone with Andrew. He's filed for guardianship? He's trying to force you into a care facility? What the hell is going on?" Eleanor maintained her composure, decades of delivering difficult medical news serving her well. "That's an accurate summary of the situation. Your brother has decided I'm incompetent and is attempting to gain control of my assets." "This is insane." Rebecca's outrage was palpable even through the digital connection. "Andrew called me 2 days ago asking me to sign an affidavit about your declining mental state. When I told him I'd observed nothing of the sort during our weekly calls, he got angry. Said I wasn't paying close enough attention, that I was in denial because I couldn't accept that you were changing." Eleanor felt a surge of relief and gratitude toward her daughter. "I appreciate your standing firm. Andrew staged a false incident last night, claiming he found me wandering the hallways confused. He called the police for a welfare check to create documentation." "That manipulative bastard," Rebecca muttered, then caught herself. "Sorry, Mom. But this is beyond the pale. Andrew told me he was protecting the family assets," his exact words. When I pressed him about what that meant, he mentioned his investment losses and how family resources should help family in need. "Did he say anything specific about his financial situation?" Samantha whispered from off camera. Eleanor relayed the question, and Rebecca's expression darkened further. "He admitted his firm is in trouble. Some venture in Singapore collapsed, and he personally guaranteed the investors against losses. He said he needs temporary liquidity. But the banks aren't being reasonable about lending against his assets." The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with devastating clarity. Andrew wasn't just trying to gain control of Eleanor's assets, he was in desperate need of immediate cash that only selling her penthouse would provide. "Rebecca, the court hearing is tomorrow at 3 p.m., Eleanor said. "Would you be willing to testify about this conversation? About Andrew's attempts to recruit you into his scheme?" Her daughter's answer was immediate and firm. "I've already booked a red-eye. I land at JFK at 6 a.m. I'll be there, Mom. Andrew doesn't get to do this to you, not while I have breath in my body." After the call ended, Eleanor turned to Samantha. With renewed determination. "We have another witness. And a critical one," Samantha agreed, her expression reflecting their improved position. "A daughter testifying against her brother about his financial motivations and attempted manipulation. Will be powerful evidence." They worked for another hour, refining their strategy to incorporate Rebecca's testimony. As they finally prepared to leave, Samantha helped Eleanor into her coat with a thoughtfulness that went beyond professional courtesy. "Eleanor," she said quietly, "whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that representing you has been a privilege. Your courage, your clarity of thought under pressure, your refusal to be victimized, you remind me of my grandmother in all the best ways." Eleanor felt something unexpected flutter in her chest, not the fear that had been her constant companion since Andrew's betrayal, but a warm appreciation for the woman who had become so much more than her attorney. "Samantha," she replied, "I've had the privilege of working with many exceptional people throughout my career. Few have shown the combination of brilliance and humanity that you bring to your work. Your grandmother would be proud of the woman you've become." As they parted in the deserted lobby, both women knew that tomorrow would determine not just Eleanor's legal fate, but the future of her relationship with her son. The battle lines were drawn, the strategies in place. Now they could only wait for the courtroom doors to open and the final confrontation to begin. The New York County Supreme Court building stood imposing against the clear blue October sky. As Eleanor ascended the stone steps beside Samantha and Alicia, despite the crisp autumn air, she felt a slight dampness on her palms beneath her carefully chosen charcoal gray suit, conservative, professional, the attire of a woman in complete command of her faculties. "Remember," Samantha said quietly. As they approached the security checkpoint, answer only the questions asked, don't elaborate unless I signal you to do so, and no matter what Blackwell says about you or Andrew, maintain your composure. Every reaction will be scrutinized. Courtroom 217 was smaller than Eleanor had expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. Andrew sat at the plaintiff's table with Nathan Blackwell, his expression a careful mask of concerned son. He had dressed the part perfectly, subdued clothing, his usual designer watch absent, his typical confident posture replaced with a slouch suggesting the weight of painful family duty. Victoria sat directly behind him, her expression unreadable behind a carefully neutral facade. You mentioned your son specifically. What about other family members? Do they share his concerns? Eleanor hesitated. My daughter Rebecca lives in Seattle with her family. We speak weekly by video call, and she's never expressed any concerns about my mental capacity. If anything, she often consults me about her children's health issues, trusting my medical judgment implicitly. Has Andrew expressed these concerns before, or is this new behavior? It's relatively new. Since his investment firm hit some turbulence last quarter, he's been more attentive, stopping by unexpectedly, asking about my financial arrangements, suggesting that managing the penthouse might be too much for me. Samantha made a note on her legal pad, and Eleanor noticed how her expression shifted subtly, a recognition of patterns she'd seen before. Dr. Wright, what I'm going to tell you may be difficult to hear, but based on my experience, when adult children suddenly express concerns about a parent's competency, especially concerns that seem exaggerated or manufactured, there are often underlying financial motivations. The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten, but also experienced a certain validation. Her instincts had been correct. You believe this is about money? I believe it's about control, which often amounts to the same thing, Samantha replied carefully. Can you tell me about your financial situation? Generally speaking, I don't need specific numbers at this stage. Eleanor described her assets, the Upper East Side penthouse purchased outright 15 years ago, her substantial retirement accounts, investment portfolio, and the trust her late husband had established. As she spoke, she observed Samantha's expression grow increasingly serious. That's a significant estate, Samantha acknowledged. Have you done any estate planning or updated your will since your husband's passing? The basic framework was established when Thomas was alive, with regular updates as our circumstances changed. The children are primary beneficiaries, with significant donations to medical research foundations. I haven't made major revisions since his death 5 years ago. Samantha nodded thoughtfully. In my experience, family members who are genuinely concerned about an elderly relative's welfare typically want to ensure that person gets the best possible care while maintaining their independence for as long as possible. They don't usually jump straight to suggestions about retirement communities unless there's been a significant incident or medical diagnosis. There's been neither, Eleanor confirmed. Which brings me to my next question, and please forgive me if this sounds blunt. What would happen to your assets if you were declared incompetent and placed under guardianship? The question hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow, though she maintained her composed exterior, a skill honed through decades of delivering difficult diagnoses. I suppose Andrew and Rebecca would manage my affairs through their power of attorney. As your legal guardians, they would indeed have control over your finances. They could make decisions about your care, your living arrangements, even the sale of your penthouse to pay for that care. Eleanor set down her teacup with a sharp click. You're suggesting my own son would manipulate me into a care facility to gain access to my assets? Samantha's voice remained steady and professional. I'm suggesting that in cases like this, it's wise to protect yourself legally before the situation escalates. Have you considered updating your estate documents to include more specific protections? Before Eleanor could answer, Alicia appeared in the doorway. Ms. Reynolds, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have an urgent call from Nathan Blackwell's office about the Hernandez case. Tell them I'll call back in an hour, Samantha replied, her focus remaining on Eleanor. They insisted it was urgent, something about new evidence being filed this afternoon regarding competency evaluation. Eleanor watched this exchange with growing unease. Is something wrong? Samantha looked back at her, professional composure slipping slightly to reveal genuine concern. Nathan Blackwell is an attorney who specializes in contested guardianship cases. He's aggressive and not particularly scrupulous about his methods for proving his cases. The implications sent a chill through Eleanor. Guardianship cases. Situations where family members petition the court to declare an elderly relative incompetent and place them under legal guardianship? Yes. It effectively removes the person's right to make their own decisions about finances, healthcare, living arrangements, essentially everything. Eleanor felt a cold clarity settling over her, the same focused calm that had always descended when she encountered unexpected complications during surgery. Let me ask you this, would Andrew need evidence to support a guardianship petition? He would. Typically, that includes documentation of concerning behavior, unsafe living conditions, financial mismanagement, medical opinions suggesting cognitive decline. Like photographs of a messy apartment? Reports of burned kettles? And unpaid bills? Observations about hand tremors? Samantha's expression confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. Exactly like that. Eleanor recalled how Victoria had held her phone during their visit, ostensibly showing photos of her niece's dance recital, but angling it toward the kitchen, the study, even Eleanor herself. They're building a case against me. Samantha nodded. Grimly. I believe they may be. And if Nathan Blackwell is involved, we need to move quickly. Once a petition is filed, you'll be forced to prove your competency in court rather than simply living your life. What do we do? First, we update your estate documents immediately to include specific provisions that make it much harder for anyone to claim you're incompetent. Second, we document your current mental state with independent medical professionals. And third, we prepare for the possibility that this becomes a legal battle. Alicia reappeared with a thick folder. I pulled the Blackwell cases from the past 2 years. The pattern is consistent: sudden claims of incompetency, staged evidence, emergency petitions filed within days of the initial family intervention. Samantha opened the folder, showing Eleanor a case summary. Elderly widower, substantial assets, adult children claiming he was confused and unsafe. Blackwell obtained an emergency guardianship order based on photographs of a cluttered apartment and testimony about concerning behavior. The man lost his home, his independence, and control of his finances within 2 weeks. Eleanor's hands were steady now, the surgeon's calm in a crisis overtaking her initial shock. How is that legal? Because the system is designed to protect vulnerable seniors, Samantha explained. Which is admirable in principle, but it can be exploited by people who understand how to manipulate the process. I've spent my career fighting these cases, trying to protect people's right to age with dignity and autonomy. Why? Eleanor asked, surprised by her own question. Samantha was quiet for a moment, her professional facade softening. My grandmother. She was brilliant, a concert pianist who taught at Juilliard well into her 80s. My uncle convinced a court she was incompetent because she refused to sell her Manhattan apartment and moved to Florida with him. By the time we could fight it, he'd sold her piano, her artwork, everything that mattered to her. She died in a facility she hated, her independence stolen. The personal story resonated with Eleanor, creating a connection beyond the professional relationship. I'm sorry that happened to her. It's why I do this work, Samantha said simply. And it's why I won't let it happen to you, Dr. Wright. But I need you to understand what we're up against. Eleanor straightened in her chair, drawing on the strength that had carried her through pioneering surgeries when everyone said a woman couldn't lead a cardiothoracic department. I understand. Andrew has apparently forgotten who his mother is. A small smile crossed Samantha's face. That's exactly the spirit we need. Sarah, clear my schedule for the rest of the afternoon. We have work to do. As Alicia left to rearrange appointments, Samantha moved to her desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. Let's start with your medical history and current cognitive status. We're going to document everything: your memory, your decision-making abilities, your daily functioning. By the time we're done, you'll have more proof of your competency than any court could question. But even as Eleanor began answering Samantha's questions, even as she felt the relief of having a champion in her corner, a part of her mind kept circling back to Andrew's betrayal. Her own son was preparing to destroy her independence for financial gain. The thought was almost incomprehensible. Samantha, she said quietly, interrupting the attorney's questions, when this goes to court, and I assume it will, how ugly is it going to get? Samantha's pen paused on the paper. Honestly? These cases can be brutal. Nathan Blackwell will attack your character, your judgment, your relationships. He'll take every minor memory lapse, every moment of normal human confusion, and twist it into evidence of incompetency. And if we lose, you lose everything: your home, your independence, your right to make your own choices. They could place you in whatever facility they choose, sell your penthouse, control every aspect of your life. Eleanor absorbed this information with the same methodical processing she'd once brought to analyzing complex cardiac pathologies. She paused, seeming to gather courage. I'm drawn to you in a way I hadn't expected, and it both excites and terrifies me. Before Eleanor could respond, her phone rang, interrupting the intimate moment. The caller ID showed Rebecca's name. I should take this, Eleanor said apologetically. Rebecca wouldn't call unless it was important. Mom, Rebecca's voice was tense with controlled anger. I just got a call from the New York Times. A reporter is working on a story about elder exploitation by legal professionals, apparently. Someone has suggested your attorney manipulated you into a personal relationship during a vulnerable time to gain access to your estate. Eleanor felt cold dread settling in her stomach as she activated the speakerphone and motioned for Samantha to listen. What exactly did they say? They asked for comment on allegations that Samantha Reynolds has a pattern of developing inappropriate relationships with wealthy clients. They mentioned specific claims about her exploiting your cognitive vulnerability and isolation following family estrangement. Samantha's face drained of color. This is Andrew, she said quietly. He's trying to destroy my reputation since he couldn't get control of your assets. The reporter mentioned they received financial records showing Reynolds' law firm's recent financial difficulties, and emails suggesting a pre-existing personal relationship between you two that predated the legal case, Rebecca continued. That's completely fabricated, Samantha said, her professional training kicking in despite her evident shock. We had no relationship whatsoever before Dr. Wright contacted my office about estate planning. After they ended the call with promises to develop a response strategy, Eleanor and Samantha sat in stunned silence. The victory they'd been celebrating suddenly felt incomplete, fragile. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us. Instead, she saw a man whose expression revealed calculation rather than concern. What exactly are you suggesting, Andrew? She asked directly. Victoria jumped in before Andrew could respond. We've been looking at some wonderful retirement communities. Places where you'd have company, activities, and most importantly, care if you needed it. I see, Eleanor said quietly. And what about my home? My independence? My life as I've built it? Andrew shifted slightly, the movement reminiscent of a patient trying to hide symptoms during examination. Mom, we're thinking about your safety, not your real estate assets. The phrase caught Eleanor's attention immediately. Something in his emphasis on real estate assets triggered her diagnostic instincts, the ability to detect when a patient was hiding crucial information. I think, she said carefully, that perhaps we should continue this discussion another time. It's been a long day. Of course, Mom, Andrew said, rising with apparent reluctance. We just want what's best for you. Promise me you'll think about what we've said? After they left, Eleanor stood motionless in her living room, mentally reviewing the interaction as methodically as she would analyze unexpected complications during surgery. The apartment felt different somehow, as if her son's words had cast shadows across familiar spaces. She walked to her kitchen, automatically checking the kettle that Victoria had claimed was scorched. It showed no signs of damage. She opened the drawer where she kept her bills and financial documents, finding them meticulously organized as always, a habit formed during years of managing both a department budget and her personal affairs. But doubt, once introduced, was insidious. Eleanor found herself wondering, had there been a visit she'd forgotten? A kettle she'd left on? Bills she'd overlooked? The very questioning of her memory created a strange vertigo of uncertainty. The phone rang, startling her from this unsettling spiral. Dr. Wright? This is Samantha Reynolds returning your call about the estate planning consultation. Eleanor took a moment to recall, yes, she'd called the attorney's office earlier in the week after reading an article about elder law in the Times. Yes, Ms. Reynolds. Thank you for returning my call. I was hoping to schedule a consultation to review my will and financial arrangements. Of course. Is this something urgent, or standard planning? Eleanor hesitated, Andrew's words still echoing in her mind. I'm not sure, she said honestly. Perhaps we could discuss that when we meet. Absolutely. Would next Tuesday afternoon work for you? Say 2 o'clock? As she noted the appointment in her leather-bound planner, the same one she'd used for decades to track surgeries, conferences, and research deadlines, Eleanor felt a small measure of her equilibrium returning. Whatever game Andrew was playing, whatever his actual concerns might be, she wouldn't face it unprepared. But as she prepared for bed that night, she found herself checking the stove, the water faucets, the locks with unusual attention. When she caught herself doing this, she felt a flash of anger at Andrew for planting these seeds of doubt. She paused before her bedroom mirror, studying her reflection critically with the same detachment she'd bring to a medical assessment. At 68, she looked younger than her years, silver hair stylishly cut, blue eyes still sharp behind designer frames, posture erect from decades of standing over operating tables. The face looking back at her was composed, intelligent, perhaps bearing the slight weathering of someone who had saved countless lives while sometimes neglecting her own needs. "You're not losing your mind," she told her reflection firmly. "And you're certainly not losing your home." Outside her windows, New York City pulsed with its eternal energy, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in one Upper East Side penthouse. But Eleanor Wright, pioneering cardiothoracic surgeon and widow, had spent her life making life-or-death decisions under pressure. She recognized the symptoms of a situation requiring intervention. The only question now was determining the most effective treatment plan. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she pressed the elevator button for the 40th floor of the sleek glass tower on Madison Avenue. The tremor wasn't from nervousness, it was the same mild essential tremor that had developed over the past year. A small surrender to time that had contributed to her decision to retire from active surgery. It certainly wasn't a sign of cognitive decline or an inability to care for herself, despite what Andrew had implied. She'd researched Samantha Reynolds thoroughly before making the appointment, identifying a practice that specialized in elder law with an impressive record of protecting seniors' rights. Eleanor approached this meeting with the same methodical preparation she'd once brought to complex surgical cases. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that balanced professional competence with personal warmth. Modern furnishings, in soothing blues and grays, were complemented by thoughtfully chosen artwork, not the generic corporate pieces she'd expected, but original works by local artists. A young woman with intelligent eyes and an efficient manner greeted her. "Dr. Wright? I'm Alicia Chen, Ms. Reynolds' legal assistant. She's just wrapping up a call but will be with you shortly. Can I offer you coffee or tea?" "Tea would be lovely. Thank you," Eleanor replied, settling into a comfortable chair and observing the office with the careful attention to detail that had made her a legendary surgeon. The space spoke of competence without intimidation, success without ostentation, qualities she had always valued in her own practice. As Alicia prepared the tea, she glanced over with evident curiosity. "Ms. Reynolds mentioned you're a retired surgeon. Cardiothoracic, right? My father had a mitral valve repair last year at New York Presbyterian." "That's correct," Eleanor confirmed. "I was Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery there until my retirement 2 years ago." Dad's surgeon mentioned. "Your pioneering work on minimally invasive techniques. Said you revolutionized the field." Alicia's expression reflected genuine admiration rather than the perfunctory interest of someone making small talk. Before Eleanor could respond, a door opened down the hallway, and Samantha Reynolds emerged. In her early 40s, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her position through competence rather than connections. Her charcoal gray suit was impeccably tailored, but it was her direct gaze that impressed Eleanor, the look of someone who saw people, not just cases. "Dr. Wright, thank you for coming in," she said, extending her hand for a firm handshake. "Please, come back to my office. Alicia, would you bring Dr. Wright's tea when it's ready?" Samantha's office reflected the same thoughtful balance as the reception area. Legal volumes and digital resources shared space with personal touches. Photographs of hiking trips, a small collection of vintage fountain pens, and several framed thank you letters from clients. She gestured to a seating area with comfortable chairs rather than positioning herself behind her imposing desk. A small detail that Eleanor, who had always preferred to deliver difficult news to patients while sitting at their level, appreciated. "So," Samantha said, settling into her chair with an attentive expression, "you mentioned on the phone that you're interested in reviewing your estate planning. Is there something specific that prompted this review?" Eleanor found herself studying Samantha's face, assessing her trustworthiness with the same careful scrutiny she'd once applied to surgical residents. What she saw reassured her: intelligence, patience, and a genuine interest in her response. "Yes, there is. My son visited me yesterday and expressed concerns about my living arrangements and mental capacity that I found troubling." Samantha's expression didn't change, but Eleanor noticed how her posture shifted slightly, becoming more alert, more focused. "Could you elaborate on the nature of these concerns?" Alicia appeared with the tea, placing it on the small table between them before quietly withdrawing. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm cup, finding comfort in the familiar ritual. "My son Andrew suggested that I'm experiencing memory lapses and confusion that I don't recall. He and his wife claim to have visited me on days when I'm certain they weren't there, mentioned incidents, like a burned kettle, that never happened, and expressed concern about unpaid bills that are, in fact, perfectly organized and up to date." She paused, taking a sip of tea before continuing. "He also commented on my hand tremor, suggesting it was evidence of declining capacity, when it's simply a mild essential tremor, common at my age and part of why I chose to retire from active surgery." Samantha listened without interruption, her attention complete and focused in a way that reminded Eleanor of her own approach to patient consultations. And how did you respond to these concerns? I disputed them, of course. But what troubled me was the pattern. Andrew and Victoria seem to be constructing a narrative of decline that doesn't match my reality. May I ask about your current living situation? Your health status? Daily routines? Samantha's questions were professional but not impersonal, the balance exactly right. For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor described her life post-retirement, her continued involvement in medical research and education, her social connections, her financial management, her physical health maintained through regular swimming and yoga. In a sun-drenched penthouse overlooking Central Park, a 68-year-old retired surgeon was about to discover the painful limits of family loyalty. What began as an ordinary afternoon tea with colleagues spiraled into a nightmare when she uncovered her son's elaborate plot to seize control of her life. Eleanor Wright wasn't someone who could be easily manipulated. After 35 years as Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at New York Presbyterian, she had built a reputation for her steady hands and unshakable judgment. When her son Andrew began subtly questioning her memory and decision-making, she had no idea she was witnessing the first steps in a calculated scheme to strip away her independence and fortune. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor's fight to maintain her freedom would lead to an unexpected alliance and prove that sometimes, life's most beautiful chapters begin when someone tries to write your ending for you. The October sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Eleanor Wright's Upper East Side penthouse, casting a golden glow across the antique Persian rug where her colleagues had gathered for their monthly medical ethics discussion. The space exuded the refined elegance of someone who had lived a life of purpose and achievement, medical journals neatly arranged alongside classic literature, walls adorned with both contemporary art and framed surgical innovations she had pioneered throughout her distinguished career. What I find most fascinating about the new cardiac stem cell research, Eleanor said, adjusting her reading glasses as she referenced the journal article they'd been discussing, is how it challenges our traditional understanding of cardiac regeneration. We always believed certain damage was permanent, but now we're seeing possibilities for renewal we never imagined. Dr. Sarah Goldstein, her former resident and now a respected cardiologist herself, nodded thoughtfully from her position on the cream-colored settee. The implications for post-infarction recovery are extraordinary. If we can stimulate native stem cells effectively, we might revolutionize treatment protocols. The other three members of their monthly gathering murmured in agreement. Dr. Richard Chen, a brilliant neurosurgeon who had often consulted with Eleanor on complex cases, leaned forward with evident enthusiasm. It reminds me of your breakthrough work on valve preservation techniques, Eleanor. Everyone said certain valves couldn't be saved, but you proved conventional wisdom wrong. Eleanor smiled, feeling the familiar satisfaction that came from intellectual discourse among equals. At 68, she'd relinquished many things, her position as department chair, the daily surgeries that had defined her life for decades, even some of the stamina that had once allowed her to perform 12-hour procedures without faltering. But her mind remained as sharp as the scalpels she had wielded with such precision, perhaps sharper for having accumulated decades of experience and wisdom. You know, she said, setting down her porcelain teacup with the measured grace that had steadied her hands through thousands of surgeries, I've been reviewing the historical parallels in medical innovation. The patterns are fascinating, periods of incremental progress punctuated by paradigm shifts that completely transform our understanding. Always the researcher, Dr. Goldstein said with affectionate respect. Even in retirement, you never stop analyzing and synthesizing. The conversation might have continued along these stimulating lines, it usually did, but the sound of the elevator doors opening in the private foyer interrupted their discussion. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, surprised. She wasn't expecting visitors, and few people had access to her private elevator. Andrew's voice carried from the entryway, unnaturally loud and with a forced cheerfulness that immediately set Eleanor's instincts on alert. Her son appeared in the living room doorway, his Brooks Brothers suit immaculate as always, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Behind him stood her daughter-in-law Victoria, her expression unreadable. Mom, I thought we'd surprise you. I completely forgot about your Thursday afternoon group, Andrew said, though something in his tone suggested to Eleanor that he had forgotten nothing. Andrew, Victoria, Eleanor rose from her chair with the poise of someone who had commanded operating rooms for decades. What an unexpected pleasure. You remember my colleagues, of course. The greetings exchanged were polite but strained. Eleanor noticed how Andrew's eyes swept the room, taking in each face with a calculating assessment that seemed oddly strategic. Victoria remained slightly behind him, her designer outfit and perfect makeup creating a polished facade that revealed nothing of her thoughts. We were just discussing the new cardiac stem cell research, Dr. Chen offered, attempting to bridge the awkward moment. Mom's always loved being on the cutting edge, Andrew replied, though his tone carried a subtle emphasis that made Eleanor's surgical instincts prickle with awareness. Though lately I've been concerned about how much time she spends alone with her medical journals. It can't be healthy to dwell so much on a profession you've retired from. The comment hung in the air, its implications more significant than its content. Eleanor felt a shift in the atmosphere, her colleagues registering the subtle undermining in her son's words. I find staying current with medical advances intellectually stimulating, Eleanor said evenly. Just as you stay current with financial markets, Andrew. Of course, Mom, Andrew said with a smile that didn't warm his eyes. We just worry about you being so isolated up here. Victoria and I were talking about how you seemed a bit confused during our phone call on Tuesday. You couldn't remember the name of that new restaurant we discussed. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. I don't recall any phone call on Tuesday, nor any discussion about restaurants. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria stepped forward then, her voice gentle in a way that felt rehearsed. That's exactly what concerns us, Eleanor. These memory lapses seem to be happening more frequently. Dr. Goldstein cleared her throat pointedly. Well, we should probably wrap up for today. Eleanor, thank you as always for hosting. The other doctors followed her lead, gathering their notes and preparing to depart. Sarah, please don't feel you need to leave, Eleanor said, recognizing the strategic isolation that was occurring. It's fine, Dr. Goldstein responded, squeezing Eleanor's arm gently. We'll reconvene next month. Call me if you need anything before then. The emphasis on her final words carried a message that Eleanor understood clearly. Sarah had registered the undercurrents in the room. Within minutes, the apartment had emptied of everyone except family. The silence felt weighted, pregnant with unspoken agendas. Mom, Andrew began, settling onto the sofa without invitation. Victoria and I have been concerned about you living alone in this huge penthouse. It's a lot to manage at your age. Eleanor remained standing, drawing on the authority that had served her well in hospital boardrooms. I manage perfectly well, thank you. I've lived here for 15 years, since your father and I purchased it after my appointment as department chair. But that was when Dad was alive, Victoria said, her voice carrying a practiced sympathy. Now you're alone, and accidents can happen. What if you fell? What if there was a medical emergency? I'm a physician, Eleanor replied dryly. I believe I'm qualified to assess medical emergencies. Andrew exchanged a glance with Victoria that Eleanor caught and mentally catalogued. Mom, that's exactly what worries us. Your professional confidence might be causing you to overlook changes in your own condition. What condition would that be, exactly? Eleanor asked, her voice carrying the precision she'd once used when questioning dubious diagnoses from junior residents. Victoria leaned forward with a concerned expression that Eleanor, with decades of experience reading people's faces before delivering life-altering news, recognized as carefully constructed. Last week when I visited, you left the tea kettle boiling until it scorched. And the stack of unopened mail on your desk, some of those looked like bills. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. I don't recall you visiting last week, Victoria. And I certainly don't recall any scorched kettle. Another meaningful glance passed between her son and daughter-in-law. Mom, Andrew said with exaggerated patience. This is exactly what we're talking about. These memory lapses are becoming more frequent. And then there's your hand tremor. Eleanor instinctively glanced at her hands, surgeons' hands that had performed thousands of delicate procedures. There was a slight tremor, one that had developed in the past year, a normal sign of aging that had contributed to her decision to retire from active surgery. A mild essential tremor is hardly cause for concern, she said. It's a common condition, especially among those my age. For most people, perhaps, Andrew countered. But you're not most people, Mom. You're alone in a massive penthouse with stairs and balconies and 1,000 ways something could go wrong. Eleanor studied her son's face, searching for the little boy she had raised while building her surgical career, the child who had once looked at her with unalloyed admiration. The stakes were clear, the enemy identified, the battle lines drawn. In that case, she said with the quiet determination that had once made surgical residents straighten their postures, we'd better make sure we win. The grandfather clock in Eleanor's foyer chimed midnight, its resonant tones echoing through the penthouse as she sat at her desk, methodically reviewing decades of financial records. Sleep had proven elusive after her meeting with Samantha Reynolds. Instead, she'd thrown herself into preparation with the same focused intensity that had once kept her in operating rooms for 20-hour stretches when a patient's life hung in the balance. The sudden pounding on her door shattered the silence. startling her so severely that she knocked over her cup of chamomile tea. NYPD. Open up? Eleanor's heart raced as she hastily tied her silk robe. Through the peephole, she could see 2 uniformed officers in the hallway, their expressions serious under the subdued lighting. Yes, officers? What's happening? She asked, opening the door while maintaining her composure despite the late hour and unexpected intrusion. Are you Dr. Eleanor Wright? The older officer asked, his voice carrying the impersonal tone of someone following protocol. I am. What's this about? We received a welfare check request from your son, Andrew Wright. He reported finding you wandering the hallways earlier tonight, confused and disoriented. Said you didn't recognize him and couldn't remember how to get back to your apartment. Eleanor's blood ran cold, her physician's mind immediately recognizing the calculated strategy behind this false report. That's absolutely untrue. I've been in my apartment all evening, reviewing financial documents. I haven't left once. The younger officer glanced around the penthouse, taking in the elegant furnishings, the meticulously organized desk, the complete absence of any sign of confusion or disarray. His partner, however, focused intently on Eleanor herself, her slightly disheveled appearance from hours of work, her natural surprise at being awakened by police, the half-empty teacup now creating a puddle on her desk. Ma'am, your son seemed very concerned, the older officer continued. He mentioned this isn't the first time this has happened, said you've been experiencing some memory issues lately. My son is lying, Eleanor stated firmly, her surgeon's directness coming to the fore. I was not wandering anywhere. I was right here, working. The officers exchanged a glance that made Eleanor's stomach tighten. She could see them processing her appearance, her evident agitation, the way her categorical denial might sound to someone predisposed to see an elderly woman in crisis. Mom! Andrew's voice from the hallway made Eleanor's heart skip a beat. He appeared in her doorway, immaculately dressed despite the hour, his face a perfect mask of filial concern. Victoria stood slightly behind him, her expression a study in practiced sympathy. Thank goodness you found her, Andrew said to the officers, his voice trembling with what sounded like genuine relief. When I saw her wandering the halls in her robe, completely disoriented, I was terrified. That is an absolute fabrication, Eleanor said, her voice deadly quiet as she turned to the officers. Officers, I need you to understand what's happening here. My son has been making false claims about my mental state, and I believe this is a deliberate attempt to create documentation for a guardianship proceeding. Andrew's face crumpled with what appeared to be genuine distress. Mom, please? You were in the hallway by the elevator, in your robe, asking where Thomas was. Dad's been gone for 5 years. Eleanor felt a cold clarity settling over her as the pieces of the trap became evident. Andrew had orchestrated this perfectly, the late-night welfare check designed to catch her at her most vulnerable, the false story calculated to seem plausible to outside observers. Andrew, how did you even get into the building at midnight? She asked, her analytical mind catching the logical flaw in his story. I have a key, Mom. Remember? You gave it to me for emergencies after your hip replacement. Last year. Eleanor had indeed given him a key during her brief recovery from surgery, a key she'd forgotten to reclaim afterward. The realization that she'd enabled this intrusion made her momentarily speechless. Officers, Andrew continued smoothly, I've been trying to get Mom to see Dr. Feldman about these episodes, but she keeps refusing. She's always been so independent. So brilliant, it's hard for her to accept that things are changing. I don't need to see Dr. Feldman because there are no episodes, Eleanor countered, struggling to keep her voice measured. What's happening here is a deliberate fabrication. Victoria stepped forward, her expression the perfect picture of concerned daughter-in-law. Dr. Wright, we all know how difficult this must be for someone who's been so accomplished. No one wants to acknowledge cognitive changes, but denying them only puts you at risk. Eleanor turned to the officers, drawing on every ounce of professional authority she'd cultivated over decades. Officers, I am a retired cardiothoracic surgeon. I was Chief of Surgery at New York Presbyterian for 15 years. I'm not experiencing cognitive decline, and what you're witnessing is my son's attempt to create a false narrative about my mental state. The younger officer looked increasingly uncomfortable, but his partner maintained his professional detachment. Ma'am, these kinds of family situations are complicated. Maybe it would be helpful to have a medical evaluation, just to be safe? That's an excellent idea, Andrew said quickly, already reaching for his phone. I'll call Dr. Feldman. She's been Mom's physician for years, she knows her history. As Andrew stepped aside to make the call, Eleanor felt the trap closing around her. Every objection she raised would be interpreted as denial or agitation. Every emotion she displayed would be viewed through the lens of Andrew's fabricated concerns. 20 minutes later, Dr. Julia Feldman arrived, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled from the emergency call. At 50, she'd been Eleanor's primary care physician for over a decade, taking over when Eleanor's previous doctor retired. "Eleanor," Dr. Feldman said, her expression concerned as she took in the scene, the police officers, Andrew and Victoria's worried faces, and Eleanor's controlled anger. "What's happening tonight?" "Julia, thank goodness," Eleanor said, relief flooding through her at the sight of a potential ally. "Andrew has fabricated a story about finding me wandering the halls confused. It's completely false." Dr. Feldman glanced between Eleanor and Andrew, her professional demeanor revealing nothing of her thoughts. "Let me examine my patient privately. Officers, family members, I'll need the room." Once they were alone, Dr. Feldman's approach shifted subtly. "Eleanor, tell me exactly what happened tonight from your perspective." In precise, clinical terms, Eleanor recounted the evening's events, her work reviewing financial documents, the unexpected police arrival, Andrew's fabricated story about finding her wandering. Dr. Feldman listened without interruption. Her trained physician's eye taking in Eleanor's coherent narrative, her clear recollection of details, her appropriate anger at being manipulated. "Your son claims you were disoriented and asking for your late husband," Dr. Feldman said. "Is there any possibility you might have been dreaming, perhaps? Sleepwalking?" "Julia, I was fully awake and working at my desk when the police arrived. I haven't left this apartment since returning from my attorney's office this afternoon." Dr. Feldman was quiet for a moment, considering. "Eleanor, this feels less like a medical emergency and more like a family situation with potential legal implications." "That's exactly what it is. I believe Andrew is building a case to have me declared incompetent so he can access my assets." Dr. Feldman's expression hardened slightly. In her years of practice, she'd encountered this scenario before: family members manufacturing medical crises to support guardianship petitions. It represented one of the most disturbing trends she'd observed in elder care. "I'm going to conduct a standard cognitive assessment," she said, her voice carrying a note of professional formality. "Protocol for these situations. But I want you to know that based on our conversation and your presentation tonight, I see no immediate cause for concern regarding your cognitive status." The assessment took 30 minutes. Dr. Feldman methodically tested Eleanor's memory, orientation, problem-solving abilities, and emotional regulation. Eleanor performed flawlessly, demonstrating the sharp intellect and clear thinking that had characterized her distinguished medical career. When they rejoined the others, Dr. Feldman's report was clinical and precise. "Dr. Wright shows no signs of cognitive impairment, confusion, or disorientation. Her mental status is entirely within normal limits for her age. She demonstrates excellent recall of recent events and clear understanding of her current circumstances." Andrew's face registered momentary shock before he recovered. "But doctor, what about what I witnessed in the hallway? The confusion, the asking for Dad?" "I can only report on what I observed during my examination," Dr. Feldman replied diplomatically. "And what I observe is a mentally competent woman who has been awakened in the middle of the night by a police welfare check." The older officer looked between Dr. Feldman and Andrew, clearly trying to reconcile the conflicting accounts. "So, there's no medical emergency here?" "No medical emergency," Dr. Feldman confirmed. "Dr. Wright is fully capable of caring for herself and making her own decisions." After the police left and Dr. Feldman departed with a meaningful look that promised further conversation, Eleanor found herself alone with Andrew and Victoria in the penthouse that suddenly felt violated by their presence. "Mom," Andrew began, but Eleanor cut him off with a gesture that had once silenced entire operating theaters. "Get out. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Eleanor's voice carried an icy precision that had once made medical residents tremble. "You orchestrated this entire scene. You falsely reported finding me confused to the police. You're building a case to have me declared incompetent." "Mom, I'm worried about you." "These episodes." "There are no episodes, Andrew. The only thing happening here is your increasingly desperate attempt to gain control of my assets." Victoria stepped forward, her mask of concern slipping slightly. "Eleanor, be reasonable. You're 68 years old. Living alone in this massive penthouse isn't practical. What happens when you have a genuine emergency?" "If and when that happens, I'll address it appropriately. But I will not be manipulated by my own son and his wife for financial gain." Andrew's face flushed with anger or embarrassment, Eleanor couldn't tell which. "This isn't about money." "Everything about this is about money," Eleanor said, moving to her front door and opening it. "Leave now. And Andrew, I'll be changing The locks tomorrow. After they left, Eleanor stood in her living room, trembling with a combination of fury and residual adrenaline. The elegant space that had been her sanctuary now felt contaminated by the night's events. She could see how Andrew would document and distort every element. Her tea-stained papers would become evidence of confusion, her disheveled appearance proof of self-neglect, her righteous anger a sign of emotional instability. With hands steadier than she'd expected, she picked up her phone and called Samantha Reynolds' emergency number. "Samantha, it's Eleanor Wright. I apologize for calling so late, but something has happened. Andrew just staged an incident with the police. He claimed to have found me wandering the hallways confused." Samantha's voice was immediately alert. "Are you safe? Are the police still there?" "I'm safe. The police are gone. My doctor examined me and found no issues, but Samantha, they're moving faster than we anticipated. Andrew had a key to my apartment. He lied to the police about my mental state. He's building his case. I'll be there first thing in the morning," Samantha said, her voice carrying the decisive authority of someone accustomed to crisis management. "This changes our timeline. If they're moving this aggressively, we need to implement our countermeasures immediately." As she ended the call, Eleanor felt a complicated mixture of emotions settle over her initial shock and anger. Andrew had overplayed his hand. In his eagerness to create evidence of incompetence, he'd created evidence of manipulation instead. Dr. Feldman had witnessed the entire charade, and her medical opinion would carry significant weight in any legal proceeding. But Eleanor also knew this was just the beginning. Andrew wouldn't stop after one failed attempt. If anything, tonight's failure would make him more desperate, more willing to escalate his tactics. The battle for Eleanor's independence had officially begun, and her own son had just declared war. But Eleanor Wright hadn't become a pioneering female surgeon by backing down from challenges. She hadn't broken through the glass ceiling of cardiac surgery by accepting defeat. She hadn't saved countless lives by surrendering when cases seemed hopeless. She walked to her window, looking out over the twinkling lights of nighttime Manhattan. The city never slept, and tonight, neither would she. There was preparation to be done, strategies to develop, allies to mobilize. Her son had forgotten a fundamental truth about his mother. Eleanor Wright didn't lose. Not in the operating room, not in the boardroom, and certainly not in this battle for her very autonomy. By morning, everything would be different. By morning, she would be ready. Samantha Reynolds' law office had transformed overnight into a command center when Eleanor arrived at 7:30 the next morning. Despite the early hour and minimal sleep, she had dressed with particular care, a tailored navy suit that projected authority, subtle makeup that enhanced without obvious artifice, her silver hair styled immaculately. If appearances would be scrutinized as evidence of her capacity, she would leave no room for criticism. Alicia Chen greeted her at the door, a stack of legal documents under one arm and what appeared to be an evidence timeline drawn on a large whiteboard behind her. "I've been here since 5 a.m., she explained, guiding Eleanor to the conference room. "After Ms. Reynolds called about last night's incident, we knew we needed to accelerate our response plan." The conference room had been converted into a strategic headquarters, legal files, medical records, and financial documents carefully organized across the long table. A digital display showed what appeared to be New York guardianship statutes, with key sections highlighted. "This arrived by courier 20 minutes ago," Alicia said, handing Eleanor a thick legal document bearing the official seal of the New York County Supreme Court. The words at the top made her heart sink despite her clinical detachment, emergency petition for guardianship and protective services. Samantha emerged from her office, her usual polished appearance slightly disheveled by what had clearly been a night of intense preparation. "They filed it at 6 a.m., claiming immediate danger to your welfare based on last night's incident. Nathan Blackwell doesn't waste time." Eleanor sank into one of the conference room chairs, the weight of the legal document heavy in her hands. "How is this possible? Julia Feldman found me completely competent." "Because the petition isn't based on Dr. Feldman's assessment," Samantha explained, pulling up a chair beside her. "It's based on Andrew's sworn statement about finding you confused and disoriented, the police report documenting a welfare check, and what Blackwell calls a pattern of concerning behavior indicating cognitive decline." Alicia moved to the whiteboard timeline she'd created. "Look at this, Dr. Wright. They've been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Every interaction Andrew had with you, every phone call, every visit, it was all designed to build a case." The young attorney pointed to different entries on the timeline. "The supposedly scorched kettle, that creates a safety concern. The allegedly unpaid bills, financial mismanagement. Your medical colleagues meeting," he interrupted, "inappropriate social isolation. Even your consultation with us about estate planning could be twisted into evidence that you're worried about your own capacity." Eleanor studied the timeline with the analytical precision that had made her a legendary diagnostician. The pattern was undeniable. Andrew had been methodically constructing a narrative of decline where none existed. What about Rebecca? She asked suddenly, thinking of her daughter in Seattle. Her statement isn't in the petition, Samantha noted, her expression thoughtful. That's potentially significant. Either she refused to participate, or Andrew is planning to use her as a supposedly independent witness, Alicia finished. Someone who will appear reluctant but ultimately corroborative. Juries and judges often find family witnesses who seem reluctant more credible. Samantha spread additional documents across the conference table. Here's what we're facing. The emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow at 3 p.m. Blackwell is requesting immediate temporary guardianship pending a full competency evaluation. If granted, Andrew would have the authority to make decisions about your living arrangements, medical care, and finances, effective immediately. Tomorrow? Eleanor's voice was sharp with disbelief. How can they move so quickly? Emergency guardianship procedures are designed to protect vulnerable adults from immediate harm, Alicia explained. The irony is that the system Andrew is exploiting was created specifically to help people like you, competent seniors being exploited by family members. Samantha opened another file folder. We're not going in unprepared. Dr. Feldman has agreed to provide expert testimony about your mental status. I've subpoenaed your medical records for the past 5 years, they show no evidence of cognitive decline. And Alicia has been researching Andrew's financial situation. Alicia's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered crucial evidence. This is where it gets interesting. Andrew's investment firm has been underperforming significantly for the past 3 quarters. He personally guaranteed several high-risk ventures that failed. His last 2 quarterly tax payments were late, and there's a lien against his Hamptons property. How did you find all this? Eleanor asked, impressed despite her distress. Public records, Alicia said with professional satisfaction. SEC filings, tax assessments, property records. Andrew Wright is facing significant financial pressure, and your estate represents a potential solution to his problems. Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication that her suspicions were correct, but also profound sadness that her son's financial desperation had driven him to such extremes. There's more, Samantha continued. I've been investigating Nathan Blackwell's other cases. Alicia, show her what you found.